there was a segment from Marc Lamont Hill, that's the host here on Al Jazeera, where he brought on a Hamas representative and an Israeli representative and talked to them about the war crimes committed by both sides of the conflict. And I've only seen a few minutes of it on Twitter, and immediately I was like, I need to watch this on stream. I need to watch this on stream. So let's watch it on stream.
On October 7th, Hamas launched a barrage of rockets from Gaza, followed by a coordinated incursion into Israel by Hamas fighters. Scores of unarmed civilians were killed and many taken hostage. In response to the attack, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu swore, quote, a mighty
I should also, of course, clarify that Al Jazeera is funded by the Qatari government.
Vengeance against the group. Israel has since retaliated with a complete siege of Gaza, launching airstrikes that razed entire districts, killing hundreds and injuring thousands in the Palestinian enclave. On today's show, we'll delve deep into the conflict. Coming up in the second half of the show, we'll speak to the former Deputy Foreign Minister for Israel and former Foreign Policy Advisor to Netanyahu, Danny Ayalon. With us first is Senior Spokesperson for Hamas, Osama Hamdan. Osama Hamdan, Senior Spokesperson for Hamas, thank you so much for joining me on Upfront.
Thank you.
On October 7th, Hamas launched an attack when they fired thousands of rockets into Israel. Militants entered the country and took scores of civilians hostage, including women, children, and the elderly. While the right of resistance is absolutely secured for all occupied people under international law, the use of force is not unlimited, and targeting civilians and taking hostages are war crimes. How can you justify attacking civilian targets?
Came right out of the gate with a great question. Not giving him any time to gather his thoughts and go start down the dialogue tree. Just starting right on the first point.
Thank you for having me. First of all, I have to say that this is the story from the.
Hey, dedicated bot, thank you for the primer. And hooligans, thank you for the prime as well. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
First of all, I have to say that this is the story from the Israeli side, which is not really true.
Bankrupt man.
What does that even mean? I mean, the Palestinian the Palestinians all will say that they did take Israeli hostages. Hamas has said they took Israeli hostages and that they'll let them go if they can negotiate something with Israel. I mean, they're openly admitting that they took civilian hostages. He didn't even talk about the mowing down of civilians in cars, which we have footage of, or the people that were murdered in their homes, or the people killed at the music festival. He's just talking about what we know Hamas themselves, in a way, has admitted to, since they've talked about negotiating with the Israeli government on the release of these hostages. They took civilian hostages, and that is a war crime.
I have to tell you to Oren Zeif, who is.
But his job is his one job is just carry water for Hamas. That's quite literally his job. So he's not going to admit to it.
An Israeli journalist. He was today in Kfar Azza settlement, and he said there is no evidences that Hamas slaughtered children. I'm sorry that the Israeli government is using that to commit its crimes in Gaza. So this is the first part of the answer. We have also some Israelis are telling this has not happened, and it's a story, fake story used to kill more Palestinians.
Fake story. There's so much overwhelming footage, physical evidence. Footage from multiple different homes, like home camera footage, cell phone footage, security cam footage, GoPro footage from Hamas themselves engaging in the operation, GoPro footage from the IDF soldiers who responded to the incursions, civilian testimony. There's so much evidence. To just cite one random journalist who said in one village that there was not evidence of babies being killed, and saying that proves that there was no war crimes, and then he calls it fake news. His job is to carry water for Hamas. That is what he's doing. I mean, it's not surprising, but it's also taking very little effort from his side. Just throw out like one random claim from a journalist, then boom, we didn't do anything.
But this is
right, but the question was, how do you justify attacking civilian targets? That was the actual question. One second, sorry. The question. The question was, how can you justify attacking civilian targets?
You are asking the wrong question.
No. The question was, how can you justify attacking civilian targets?
You are asking
Marc Lamont, all he should do is should put on some footage on screen right now of like Hamas's own GoPro footage of them going around randomly shooting in homes.
You are asking the wrong question.
We may disagree on what the right question is, but I would like you to answer this question. How do you justify attacking civilian targets?
This is a wrong question, and I'm not going to the same game of the Israelis.
Well, I'm asking a very clear question about civilians.
Okay.
Let me ask a very direct question. Have any civilians been killed?
Well, I don't know exactly because this is what's told by the Israelis. What I'm telling you,
I don't know. Maybe. Who knows? I mean, he's leaving it as vague as possible because the evidence is so overwhelming. So he's just trying to create some sort of fog of war around if civilians died in Israel so that people will take that and go around and look at any story of Hamas's atrocities and just say fake news, fake news, fake news. That's what he's doing. He's trying to equip people to disregard any of the evidence for the mass killings of Jews in southern Israel. And not only Jews, migrant workers from overseas, Christians, even Muslims as well. Like they slaughtered basically anyone they could get their hands on and kidnapped the rest.
that for this Israeli government.
You just cited Oren Zef. He says
It's impossible for, I mean, guys, I'm starting to think Hamas might not be a super credible organization. They're losing credibility rapidly.
civilians were killed.
No, he didn't say. He said no evidence that children were slaughtered. I don't know.
He said dozens of bodies.
There's more than one journalist. There's not just one person who will confirm or deny whether civilians were killed. You could have read any other report. You could have talked to the soldiers who went over there and did the killing, the Hamas soldiers.
Of Israelis murdered in their homes.
Excuse me.
Those were his words.
You are wasting the time. It's your time. It's not my time. You are wasting the time.
All right, let's pause for a moment, sir. My question is, if you find out that civilians have been killed, would you consider that justified or would you consider that unjustified?
There is 300 children have been killed today in Gaza by the Israelis.
What a cowardly little bastard. He won't answer any of the questions. He can't even answer the hypothetical question of if Hamas did kill civilians, is that bad? He can't even answer that because he knows that they did kill civilians, but he won't admit to it. But also if he says that if they killed civilians, that's bad, and then Marc Lamont Hill just plays footage of them killing civilians, well then he's kind of trapped himself, hasn't he? So he can't answer the question. He has to pivot away. This is like, he's not even like a good propagandist.
200 women have been.
This is like when you take, those North Korea presentation, like North Korean news. 1 second. North Korean news podcast. Like this woman. This is like if you took this woman and put her on an actual interview show with the free press and had her try to answer questions. It would be impossible for her to interact in an environment, a media environment, where the narrative isn't completely controlled every step of the way by the ruling party.
Killed today by the Israelis in Gaza. 1,200 children were injured. 1,000 women were injured today, just today and yesterday in Gaza. You are asking me the wrong question. You have to ask about what is happening in Gaza.
Don't ask us about all the civilians we killed. Just ask us about the civilians that Israel kills. It's really inconvenient when you highlight our atrocities. Just highlight the atrocities of our enemy.
Which is under the siege for the last 17 years, which is under the offensive Israeli attack for the last 4 days. You keep asking about...
By the way, is that a picture of himself? Who is that a picture of? I know that's not the leader of Hamas. I know what the leader of Hamas looks like. So that just... Does he just have, in his interview space, in his room, wherever it is, when he does interviews, he has himself and then another picture of himself behind it. It's not even like a painting or like a cool artistic recreation. It just, I don't think that's him. Could be his dad. Who knows? I guess I'm uneducated.
Israeli attack.
I'll just assume it isn't him. If it is him, though, that's very funny.
For the last 4 days, you keep asking about the Israelis why you don't ask about the Palestinians.
So that's a fair question, sir. That is no, sir. Sir. That is a fair question.
Excuse me, I have to continue. You are asking about the Israelis. You don't ask about the Palestinians. No one cares about the Palestinians. This is the story. The story is the occupation. 75 years of occupation for the Palestinians. We have to talk about the occupation and how the Palestinians are looking for this occupation, and how can we make an end for this occupation. This is the story. It's not the story about what you are asking about.
Chat, stop calling him Hamas and Abi, okay? Stop that.
Okay, I understand your perspective. To be clear,
this chat is too white to be making that joke.
After this interview, I will be interviewing a representative of the Israeli military, and I will be asking him about Israel's war crimes. I absolutely acknowledge that Israel has committed war crimes. In fact, I have written a book with a whole chapter about Gaza and the war crimes that have been committed against Gaza there. So please do not suggest to me that I do not take this issue seriously. However, let me finish. I allowed you.
Thank you for clarifying
I allowed you to finish.
Thank you for clarifying that.
But so now that we clarified that, but sir, let me.
You can't compare.
I understand.
Okay.
I'm not comparing anything. I'm not comparing anything. But please allow me to finish. My question for you is everyone living inside of a settlement a legitimate military target for Hamas?
According to the international law, the settlers are not civilians.
So, sir, again, human rights organizations have said
that's not. By the way, that's not true. You cannot go into a kibbutz. Well, we're talking about settlers now, so we're talking about West Bank. But you cannot go into the West Bank and go into some home and start blowing lead into random settlers' children and babies and shit like that. That's not legal under international law. If the settler has a gun and they've started a settler militia, which those do exist, then yes, you can engage them as if they were military targets.
The legal status of settlements under international humanitarian law does not negate the rights of the civilians living there. The fact that a person lives in a settlement, whether legal or not, does not make him or her a legitimate military target. So in light of the fact that human rights organizations would argue that even if settlements are illegal, the people living inside of them are still considered civilians, how do you see moving forward Hamas's vision of whether or not settlements are legitimate military targets?
Well, the legitimate thing, which I believe in, that Palestine is our land. Our people are...
He just doesn't... The thing is, what Marc Lamont Hill is referencing here and trying to cite here as a basis as to why what they did is wrong is international law. And this guy, in our conceptions of international law, like whether we like those things or not, this guy doesn't give a fuck. He's the spokesperson for Hamas, which just engaged in a brutal massacre in southern Israel, which he won't even admit to because he's a propagandist and he isn't allowed to admit to it, and he's just being led around on a leash by Hamas. That's his job. That's what he's doing. So making any appeals, none of this is going to work because he just doesn't care. He doesn't respect the same institutions and the same international law that other nations respect. Well, at least when those laws are being applied to him, his group.
Our land, challenging the occupation for the last 75 years. On those 75 years, the women, the children were killed by the Israeli soldiers, the Israeli settlers. Their homeland was taken. They were replaced by Israelis who came from everywhere in the world. They talk different languages, and they claim that this land is for them. If you ask any one of them about the grave of his father, he will take you to Poland or to Argentina. But if you ask any Palestinian about the grave of his 17th grandfather, he will take you to some place in Palestine, showing you the graves, telling you, this is where my 17th grandfather was buried, or maybe before that. We are in this land from the days of Jesus Christ. Don't ask me about those settlers and those soldiers who are killing my people every day, every time. And this is the fact which creates the resistance of the Palestinians. The Palestinians did not start the war.
Let's talk about the Israeli response to the Hamas attack, which has been horrific. Israel is bombing Gaza and declared a complete siege. It's cut off food, fuel, and water from being admitted to over 2 million people. Thousands of Palestinians are going to die.
I think the photo is of the co-founder of Hamas. Okay, thank you.
One resident from Khan Yunis said, this is a
I know Biden's speaking in the Oval Office. We'll do it afterwards.
bloody war that is different from previous wars. What is going on right now is total annihilation. We see this horrific response by the Israeli government. My question for you is, have the actions of Hamas over the past week made things worse for Palestinians on the ground?
This is such a great question. This is a question that is not getting broached enough. And I think in a lot of the circles online where people are trying to either semi-justify Hamas's actions or something along those lines. If you look at what Hamas has done, all they did is end up killing. If you outside of the tanks that they blew up and the soldiers that they attacked, the majority of the people they killed in southern Israel were civilians. This pissed off all of Israel, not only the government, but the vast majority of Israeli society. And the two groups that they're angry at is, number one, Netanyahu for allowing something like this to happen, and number two, Hamas for doing the actual killing of their people. And so now they're engaged in a barbaric, very overwhelming bombing campaign, almost medieval in its style, and at least its kind of disregard for civilian casualties, and it's in the style of the siege, with no way for the Palestinians to escape through Egypt or Israel or into the sea. And what has Hamas achieved? Has Hamas achieved a Palestinian liberation? Has Hamas achieved a better standard of living for Palestinians? What has Hamas achieved? If Hamas is supposed to act as a representative of the Palestinian people, even if they haven't held an election since 2006, have they represented them well by sending them into an extremely bloody chapter in the struggle between Palestinian liberation and Israeli expansionism?
The Israelis have done this before.
Because now, the vast majority of the world, when they saw the start of this war, everybody understood what the next thing was going to be, and that was Israeli military intervention. Everyone understood it immediately.
They done that in 2014. They cut the electricity from Gaza in 2014 for 17 days. They cut the aids for the hospitals. In 2014, 2,500 Palestinians were killed. In 2021, more than 1,000 Palestinians were killed. No one remembers the numbers because they are only Palestinians. But I want to tell you, they were shocked by what had happened to their army. 11 points, military points were attacked by the militants of Hamas. The soldiers were killed or being taken as war prisoners, and the Israelis were shocked. This is the main troops attacking Gaza for the last 10 years. They fall down in a few hours. This is the shock. They want to get back the image of Israel army.
Hamas could not have anticipated the Israeli reaction, Dylan. What was the strategy? Hamas goes into Israel, kills 1,400 of its people, deadliest day in Jewish history since the Holocaust, and then Israel's just like, oof, man, that blows, man. That's oy vey, man. What really? Come on. I can't. I'm just gonna assume the comment was sarcasm, but it's hard to tell with that chat, man. Gutter chat.
They want to show everyone that Israel can destroy everyone.
That's an interesting point, sir. That's an important point you're making. You're saying that Israel sort of commits to a certain kind of response when it looks bad, that Israel responds disproportionately, and that Israel already wants to use this as a pretext for destroying the Palestinian people. I'm saying if you know that's going to happen, then how do you calculate the decision to launch an attack knowing that a university is going to be bombed, knowing that power is going to be cut off, knowing that fuel is going to be cut off, knowing that people are going to die because of the Israeli response? If you know that, why do you still make the attack, particularly when the Palestinian people don't have a say in whether or not that's going to happen?
65%, according to recent polling, of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip did not want the ceasefire to be broken. That's from a few months before October 7th when the Hamas attack occurred. There hasn't been an election in the Gaza Strip since 2006. The majority of the population in Gaza did not vote for Hamas. 48% of the population in Gaza is under the age of 14. They literally couldn't have voted for Hamas even if they wanted to.
This is a good question. You know, the fact that the Israelis are killing the Palestinians on all the ways, all the times. For example, in West Bank in the last 10 months, more than 500 Palestinians were killed. Most of them were civilians. They were shooted in the streets, just demonstrating peacefully against the Israeli troops. The fact which everyone have to understand is that this occupation is killing the Palestinians all the time. He's not giving them any chance to have normal life. He's not giving them the chance to be independent and to have their independent sovereign state, even after 30 years of signature of Oslo Agreement. He's not implementing any international resolutions. He doesn't care about the international law. So we are facing this fact. The Israelis are killing you if you are treating them peacefully or if you are resisting them. And at the end of the day, the occupation is still there. So it's better to resist than being slaughtered daily without even resisting the occupation.
What was the goal of last week's actions? What was the immediate goal of last week's
That's a fantastic follow-up.
actions? What would you say the target or goal was?
The goal is to make an end for the Israeli attacks against the Palestinians, to make an end for the Israeli attacks on Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa, and West Bank, taking over the lands.
But that didn't happen. It didn't create an end of that. It intensified it. It intensified the violence. It didn't bring an end to the violence.
And to lift the siege on Gaza. The Israelis are planning for a long occupation on Palestine. And I think if they don't get the lesson from what had happened in the last 4 days, this army will not protect them. Their violence will not protect them. Even if they were supported by the United States, if they want to be protected, they have to acknowledge the Palestinian rights and to implement the international resolutions which gave the Palestinian people their rights without negotiations. Those are rights. No one can negotiate our rights.
Osama Hamdan, thank you so much for joining me on Upfront.
Thank you.
We tried repeatedly to get an Israeli army spokesperson on the show to respond to Hamas, but they canceled the scheduled interviews. For more on the developments in Gaza, we are joined by Israel's former deputy foreign minister and a former foreign policy advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Danny Ayalon.
By the way, Hamas, we aren't surprised that that's how Hamas dealt with the interview, which is just deny, but if asked if killing civilians is bad, obfuscate. So if there is evidence, so that means, number one, they didn't do it, but if they did do it, it wasn't bad, right? No matter what, Hamas is always right.
Danny Ayalon, thank you so much for joining me on Upfront.
My pleasure.
Danny, last Saturday, the 7th, Hamas launched a devastating attack. Thousands of rockets were fired towards Israel, and hundreds of Hamas fighters crossed into the country. There are reports of horrific killings of Israeli civilians, a clear violation of international law. In response, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu threatened to turn the Gaza Strip into, quote, rubble, and the government announced a, quote, complete siege of the enclave. Since then, we've seen mass bombing in Gaza with reports that hundreds of civilians have been killed. Now, while the actions of Hamas are a clear, and I want to emphasize that, a clear violation of international law, isn't the collective punishment of all Gazans also, by definition, a war crime?
Not really, because the situation is very clear. You know, as you mentioned, rightly so, Hamas perpetrated a...
Wait. So the question was, isn't the collective punishment of Palestinians also a war crime? And instead of rejecting the premise, which would be the smartest thing for him to try to do, is reject the premise and try to explain from his perspective how it isn't collective punishment. Don't bite that bullet. If you bite the bullet of collective punishment and you admit that it's collective punishment, you fucked yourself, because collective punishment is a war crime. Or is he just saying well, their fault? I mean, it would be more honest than the Hamas guy at the very least.
An attack, which was a surprise attack. The IDF was caught unprepared, and they got...
Don't help him? Yeah, he might hear me.
a major victory for the first 24 hours. But who was this victory against? Babies and children and whole families that were massacred in bed. The IDF was nowhere to be seen. When the IDF came back now, they pushed them back into the Gaza. Now, the problem with the Hamas is that they're committing a double war crime because they are targeting only civilians. And they're using their own civilians, the poor Palestinian of Gaza, as human shields. And what Israel did gave them a fair warning.
On one hand, it's so crazy because, like, he'll be asked, isn't the collective punishment of Palestinians also a war crime? And he'll say, no. There's like a complete disregard for them. And then later, when he's talking about what Hamas does to the Palestinian population, he's like, oh, the poor Palestinians. It's like one instance, there's just like, when it's what the Israelis are doing to them, there's zero sympathy. When it's what Hamas is doing to them, maximum sympathy. Oh, we care so much about the Palestinian population. If you are stopping food, water, and medicine from getting into Gaza to punish the population of Gaza for either voting for Hamas in 2006 or for Hamas's presence in the Gaza Strip and them not being kicked out by the population of Gaza, which is not that easy, that they're now all going to have to just be stuck there knowing that there's no way for them to get out through Egypt or through the ocean or through Israel. That is collective punishment.
I think this is the only way to do with them. Is we told the Gazan people to clear the area temporarily so we can go and take Hamas out. And then, of course, they can come back. So this, by definition, is not a war crime. We understand the plight of the Palestinians. They deserve...
How is it by definition not a war crime?
We can go and take Hamas out. And then, of course, they can come back. So this, by definition, is not a war crime. We understand the plight of
collective punishment through stopping the resources from getting in while everybody's trapped in Gaza. That is a war crime. And there is a certain responsibility that any invading force has to take to limit civilian casualties that through their actions gives me a clear indication that they're not taking a lot of those precautions. If you're not even allowing food, water, and medicine to get to the people who need it, then how can you say that you're taking those precautions?
the Palestinians. They deserve their dignity and everything else, but nothing justifies butchering families. You know, this day, as you mentioned, 7th of October, was the day that more Jews were killed in 24 hours than any other day since the Holocaust. So you see,
I mean, without question, respectfully, this is a devastating moment, an extraordinary act of violence that again is a violation of international law. But you said a couple of things that I want to push you on. The idea of collective punishment is one of the things that we're talking about here. Electricity has been cut, power has been cut, fuel has been cut. The Gazan people right now are being punished for the actions of Hamas. How is that not by definition collective punishment?
Two things. First of all, Hamas has turned Gaza into an enemy state. So there is no law, nothing in international law that compels a country you are in a war with to supply them the electricity. Now,
but Israel also knows that because of the blockade that they've maintained for a very long time, there's no other way for them to get food and water and medicine into Gaza outside of through Israel or through Egypt. And Egypt isn't letting it in, and Israel isn't letting it in. And since the Palestinians have no place to go, ultimately your decision to block that is what's going to slowly starve the Palestinian population. And look, I understand the argument of like, well, we wouldn't want to supply Hamas. But let's be clear, Hamas is not going to be the first people to run out of water. The first people that are going to run out of water are going to be working class Palestinians. The first people who are going to want to run out of medicine, working class Palestinians. The first group of people that are going to run out of food are going to be working class Palestinians, not Hamas, who has stuff stored, food, water, fuel, generators, and all sorts of stuff stored in the tunnels under the city.
What do they use the electricity for?
As an occupying power, international law does say that you have certain responsibilities by law. But before we get there, even if we'll hold it for a moment, the power thing, there are residential buildings being hit. There are hospitals being hit. This is a densely populated area. The idea of being able to run away or to escape or go to a safe area seems impossible. Also, according to your own military representatives, you've abandoned the idea of knocking on roofs, that is to say giving a warning of dropping a non-explosive munition on buildings before people go. So people aren't getting a warning. They have nowhere to go. Residential buildings, schools, and hospitals are being hit. How is this not, again, an act of collective punishment? And how is this not a target of civilian, unless, of course, you're regarding everybody in Gaza as an enemy combatant?
Okay, well, I hear you. But again, what we gave the population is a fair warning. What would you do? You know,
is the fair warning? I just want to make sure we're on the same page here. Benjamin Netanyahu told everyone to leave the area. Where were they to go?
Okay, I mean, this is thought out. It's not something that we tell them, go to the beaches, go drown yourselves, God forbid. Not at all. There is a huge expense, almost endless space in the Sinai Desert, just on the other side of Gaza.
But
the
they
idea
can't go to the Sinai Desert.
The first time
Egypt won't let them leave.
It will be done.
Everyone knows that Egypt won't let them leave. And if Egypt won't let them leave, then what are you going to do? Then what are you going to do? Then it's, go to the place you're not allowed to go.
The idea is for them to leave over to the open areas where we and the international community will prepare the infrastructure, tent cities with food and with water. You know what? Just like for the refugees of Syria that fled the butchering of Assad a few years ago to Turkey. Turkey received 2 million of them. This is the idea. Now, Egypt will have to play ball here because
there's also a lot of fear, by the way, from Palestinians that if they leave Gaza, they'll never return. And that's actually one of the reasons that the Egyptian government gave as to why they're not letting Palestinians come to Egypt, is because they believe that if the Palestinians leave, the Israelis might never let them back. And then that is the end of a prospective Palestinian state. And they also don't want to have to support Palestinian refugees in perpetuity, as they have been supported in locations like Jordan and locations like Lebanon.
Once the population is out of sight, then we can go. You know what what Hamas did.
To be clear, though, Egypt should open the border.
When you said the population out of sight, is that practically possible in such a densely populated area? And 40, I mean, you have 2 million people in a densely populated enclave. 47% of the inhabitants are children. Is it reasonable or plausible to think that all those people are going to relocate to this excluded area and be safe from a bombing attack? And again, we're saying there's warnings, but there are numerous reports on the ground that there are no warnings, that people are getting hit, that families have been killed from these attacks.
I'll tell you in a practical manner what we should do and what we can do. Create, like in the past in history, a humanitarian corridor. When there is a humanitarian corridor, and we have been discussing this with the United States, then we can guarantee in this corridor that nobody will get hurt. Now, again, I say there is a way to receive them all on the other side for temporary time on Sinai, because what did Hamas turn out?
On the other side, are we talking about Rafah? Are you saying the other side that go to Egypt?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And Egypt will have to play ball because this is human life is at stake. And if you're talking as human life is at stake because you're cutting off power, you're shutting down hospitals, you're bombing residential buildings. I mean, right now, there is a hospital that does not have sufficient power. There is a hospital where people are literally going to die. And Israel's energy minister, Israel Katz, said no electrical switch will be turned on, no hydrant will be open, no fuel truck will enter until the Israeli abductees are returned home.
That just sounds like collective punishment. Give us back our hostages or everyone will starve to death. That's what it sounds like.
Now, the ICRC spokesperson, Hisham Mahana, said that by cutting that power, hospitals are going to turn into graveyards. This is not an ideologue. This is the International Committee of the Red Cross. They're saying that because of your country's actions, not the actions of Hamas, not the actions of Egypt, but because of Israel's actions, the hospitals are going to turn into graveyards. How is that not a war crime? How is that defensible by any standard?
Oh, also, this does this isn't one point I should make, just to be clear. Hamas should have released the hostages yesterday. Because once Hamas releases the hostages, the argument from Israel to continue the blockade evaporates. Definitely after statements like that were made by the defense minister. But again, Hamas doesn't always look out for the best interests of the Palestinian people. Because again, they're very self-interested.
First of all, the war crime, if anything, is Hamas. They are the ones, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Hamas does not allow, sometimes when they can, they keep those civilians captive. They don't allow them to run away because this is what they want. Now, I know the area, and I suppose you're talking about the main hospital, which is the Shifa hospital. Yep. The Shifa hospital has been turned into a Hamas bunker. If Hamas wants to save them, they should just leave their arms, come out, and nothing will happen. But as long as they keep the Shifa hospital, just like schools and kindergartens, as bunkers, and they fight out from there, there is no law. There is no law in this universe that protects them. And this is what we're doing, and this is why the world
are there any independent reports? Are there any intelligence reports that show that the Shifa hospital is primarily a Hamas bunker and not an actual medical site?
Yes, and you know what?
Where?
You know what?
Where?
And mark my words, and you can show it again because I know it's recorded. When this war is over, and we will bring in the international press to Shifa and to all the bunkers, the underground tunnels that Hamas has created in Gaza, ask intelligence services of every country in the world, they know it. But anyway, what I'm saying is...
No, just to be clear for the audience's benefit, no intelligence services has claimed that. Not one government has claimed that the Shifa hospital is a Hamas bunker. That is your claim, and I want to be very clear that that is your claim. And you're saying you don't have any reports, but that I should just trust you.
No.
Mark your words, trust you, and later on it'll be proven true.
I'm telling you, everybody will see.
Okay.
After the war is
fair enough. I have to move on just in the interest of time. But I want to continue.
I mean, like, I don't know about if this specific hospital is used by Hamas that way. I know Hamas has used, for example, UN schools, and this has been confirmed by UN reports. So take it up with the UN. Don't take it up with me if you disagree. They have used UN schools for weapon storage. And they have used other locations where civilians do congregate for weapon storage. So the idea of them using a hospital for either weapon storage or as a base isn't completely outside the realm of possibility. But also, I'm not going to take the deputy foreign minister of Israel's word on it.
On this same vein, because the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, said that he was deeply distressed by Israel's announcement of a siege on the Gaza Strip. He said that the humanitarian situation, quote, will only deteriorate exponentially, and that crucial life-saving supplies, including fuel, food, and water, must be allowed into Gaza. So the UN is saying you must do this. You are saying you're not going to do this. How do you?
No, we're not saying that.
He's saying do it. He's saying doing it immediately. What I'm saying is what you're doing.
No.
He's saying doing it immediately.
I got you. I'll tell you exactly what we're saying. I'm saying we will do everything for the Gazan people. Once and now we demand immediate surrender, unconditional surrender of Hamas. If Hamas people come out with their hands up and clear their weapons, believe me, everything will be restored to Gaza. It is Hamas. In Hamas hands.
Okay, now I understand. Thank you for clarifying that, sir. I think we're actually on the same page here. You're saying that once Hamas leaves, you'll grant the Gazan people food, shelter, fuel, electricity, hospitals, schooling. And if they don't, and if Hamas doesn't leave, then they'll continue to starve and die in hospitals. You are defining for the international community right now collective punishment. You're saying until Hamas acts differently, the 2 million people in Gaza are going to be treated this way. And once Hamas acts differently, these 2 million people in Gaza will be treated better. That is exactly what collective punishment is. You're holding them accountable for the actions of others. That is the definition, the textbook definition of collective punishment.
Marc Lamont Hill is spitting. He is spitting here. He is spitting, and he is spitting more.
Sir, now you may accept that that's what you want to do, but this is absolutely a contravention of international law.
Well, I'll tell you exactly. No, if we pushed them into the wall, we're not pushing them to the wall. We want to open a humanitarian corridor so they can leave. But if Hamas,
so that who can leave? Citizens?
They could do it right now. They could do it. They could find somewhere for them to leave. They could, but they're trying to put that on Egypt, and Egypt should do it too. But there's no one for them. There's nowhere for them to go now. And for the meantime, since there's nowhere for them to go, they need food, they need water, and they need medical attention, and they need fuel to power hospitals and power generators and have electricity.
You're saying civilians can leave, but only through the Rafah border, correct?
At this point, yes.
So they can't come.
Where else?
Your country. They can come into Israel.
I'm telling you one more thing I want to say.
I want you to address that point. Don't just smile, sir. Respectfully, you're saying you're making a corridor. They can go to Egypt. You're bombing them. You say you want to save them, but they can't come in.
First of all, I'm not smiling. I'm crying in my heart. I'm crying in my heart.
He was why would he even deny? His face is on camera. Why would he deny that he 100% was smiling? I mean, I don't necessarily know if that was connected to, I'm smiling at the suffering of the Palestinian people, but why would he deny that he was 100% smiling? Okay, let's go back. He said he's not smiling. Let's see. Yeah, no, he wasn't smiling at all, man. This is what they call an Israeli frown. Yeah, it's a cultural thing. You guys wouldn't understand.
First of all, I'm not smiling. I'm crying in my heart. I'm crying in my heart for all the butchery of thousands of Israelis. Why do you think the world is with us? Why do you think the world is wise? All the international media was there. So don't talk to me.
They were against the butchery in southern Israel. Not the entirety of the international community is in favor of the operation in Gaza or how you're doing it. For example, UN Security Council just had a vote on opening a humanitarian corridor into Gaza. And there's only one country that voted against it because it didn't have a strong enough condemnation, I guess. That's what the American government said. Strong enough condemnation of the attacks in southern Israel, and that country was the United States, one of Israel's main power brokers, main power backers.
About collective punishment, don't talk about humanitarian. These are new rules of the game. There is no coexistence with Hamas, which is worse than ISIS, and we will not stop. We are allowing the population to leave. But if Hamas will surrender, there won't be any problem whatsoever.
Danny Ayalon, thank you so much for joining me on Up Front.
Pleasure.
Was it a pleasure? It doesn't say pleasure. Pleasure.
All right, that is our show Up Front. We'll be back next week.
He's very satisfied. Very, very satisfied with that one. Man, that was a good interview for Marc Lamont Hill. It was a great interview. Took the time to slap Hamas and slap Israeli government officials. You love to see it. Love to see it. Do.